Verhelaxal. I am Skeggy Vetter, and welcome to the Norse Code. Now tonight, we're not going to dive into a Norse story. We're not going to talk about, we are going to talk about the gods, but we're not going to talk about the mythology. We're not going to talk about how to worship them. We're not going to talk about very many things here that are factual. In fact, tonight, it's going to be primarily speculation. And not necessarily speculation that is rooted in reality. This is purely my speculation based off of the research I've done and some thoughts I have. But I wanted to get it out there and maybe start a discussion on it and see what other people think on it. So the question that started all this is a very simple one, and one that we've even talked about on this channel before, and that is, who were the Vanir? Where did they come from? Now, let's give a little factual side of it. Now, we've covered this before, but I'm going to give the Spark Notes version of it. So the Vanir are another race of gods, aside from the Aesir. They came from someplace else. They are much more nature-based as opposed to the Aesir, which are more your, I guess you can say, traditional gods. The Vanir just kind of came out of nowhere. We don't know many of them. We know for sure Njord, Freyr, and Freya. That's it. Those are the only three that we have named as Vanir. Now, there are a few other gods and goddesses out there who some think should be considered Vanir. I know for myself, I consider Skadi to be Vanir. I consider Ullr to be Vanir, not only because of how they get mixed in with the mythology, how Skadi became a goddess, but also what they stand for. Their values, what they do, who they are, stands in line with the Vanir. Very nature-based, very natural, very, they're in that realm of kind of animism, where everything in nature is sacred, everything has a spirit, everything is something to be worshipped. And who they are, what they stand for, very much in line with that. If you want some more insight into why I think this way, head over to one of my previous episodes in which we talked about Skadi, and then I had an episode on Ullr, and in both I go into detail as to why I think they are Vanir. But the bottom line is, we don't know where the Vanir come from. Yes, they come from Vanaheim. That's all we know. That's it. The information of the Vanir is very, very, very limited. And anthropologists, archaeologists believe that the Vanir are actually a collection of gods from another people. Somebody that came into Scandinavia. There may have been some turmoil, and the Scandinavians won out, but during the process took some of the gods from these other people as their own, and that's who the Vanir are from a anthropological standpoint. There's no evidence of this. This is purely conjecture. It's very probable, but we don't know for sure. The bottom line is, we just don't have enough written history to know for sure. So that led me to think, and trying to think of who they could have come from. Now, I know most anthropologists think that it was another Germanic group that kind of came through, that was short-lived, that don't exist anymore, didn't exist at any point in which we can actually have written information on them. I don't think that's who it was. In fact, I think the people that the Vanir came from are still around today. I believe that the Vanir, Njord, Freya, and Freyr, and by extension Skadi and Uller, are in fact gods from the Sami people. Alright, let's stop here. No, you're asking, who the hell are the Sami people? Great question. Let's talk about the Sami people. Now, I'm going to throw a little disclaimer out there. I am still learning about the Sami people. I want to do a full video in detail on the Sami people. I'm not ready to do that yet. So what I'm about to give you is a very brief and very truncated history of the Sami people. Now, the Sami people are the people that live all the way in the very far north of Scandinavia. Northern Norway, northern Sweden, northern Finland, and part of a peninsula in Russia. These people have been there since the end of the last ice age. Once that area was no longer covered in ice, people moved in there. These became the Sami people. They've been there for 10,000 years. We have art from them from 10,000 years ago. And what's interesting is the art that they have from 10,000 years ago dictate that the Sami people were doing then, same thing they're doing today. Reindeer hunting, skiing, fishing, hunting moose, hunting bear, being a nomadic people. And that's who they are. That's who they've been for 10,000 years, despite Christians, Norwegians, and Swedish trying to destroy the Sami people. We'll cover that in far more detail when I do the Sami episode. I'm not going to cover that tonight because it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But the Sami people were that mystical group. The Scandinavians were aware of them. The Scandinavians were somewhat frightened of them. The Scandinavians were at times belligerent with them, but they also traded with them. I mean, the Sami people is where we got walrus and otter and reindeer and all this other very northern Arctic animal furs and meats and ivory and antlers. The Scandinavians got all that from the Sami people trading with them. In return, most often they'd give them like metal or something the Sami people didn't have. But I'm kind of jumping all over the place. Let's talk about who the Sami people were. The Sami people are Arctic people who their religion is very animistic. Everything has a soul. Everything has a spirit. They are very nature-based. They're very careful about how much they take from the land, what they give back to the land, and they have these beautiful, beautiful songs. If you go on YouTube, you can find some Sami rituals and Sami songs and whatnot. They're beautiful. And in fact, what's funny is the very first time that I listened to one, I just kind of stumbled upon it and I wasn't really paying attention, and I thought I had stumbled upon something that was Native American, and it wasn't. It was the Sami people. But it's really, really interesting, and I'll talk more on this when we do their episode, but I want to briefly touch on the Sami people and Native Americans. Basically the same. Animism, shamanism, nomadic, the types of building. Sami people build teepees. They don't call them teepees, but they're teepees. But their songs, their rituals, everything, it just lines up so well, which makes sense considering Native Americans, migrated from northern Russia, inside the Siberia area into North America, and it is thought that at least some of the Sami people came from the same place. The Sami are not Germanic. The Sami are Finuric. I think is the term. Their language is completely different. Their ethnicity is completely different. They didn't come through Germany into Scandinavia and went north. They came from Siberia through Russia and up. So they have a completely different basis from where they're from. And that's language, culture, religion, all of it, completely different basis from Scandinavia and the other Germanic tribes, the Indo-Europeans. But yeah, the Sami people are fascinating people. A lot of times, if you look up Norse drums, you'll see these beautiful drums with all this ornate artwork on it. That's not Norse. That's Sami. The drums for the Sami people were super, super important, especially for their shamans. They would use the drums to help them get into a meditative state. They would use the drums while singing to perform magic. They'd use the drums and a pebble for fortune telling. The way that they had the pictograms on their drum, they'd put a pebble on there and beat on the drums, and wherever the pebble landed as it's bouncing around, that would help tell the future or give the information that the person asking was looking for. And it's exactly that which first caught my attention. The magic that the Sami people performed is Seder. The Seder practiced by the Norse people came from the Sami people. They were in talks, they interacted with each other, and sure enough, some of what the Sami people were doing, the Norse people started doing. And in this case, we're talking about magic. They called it Seder. We know that Seder had a very poor connotation. It was, you should not be caught doing Seder for multiple reasons. One, it was considered women's magic, so men should not practice it, even though Odin practiced it. It was okay for him to do it. Well, he still got some shit for doing it, but even the women who practiced Seder were often doing it in secret because they would get somewhat ridiculed for doing it. It was a very taboo topic. And it was, part of the reason it was taboo is because it wasn't the Norse people's magic. It wasn't from their religion. It was from the Sami people. So when I heard that, I got to thinking. Freya brought Seder to the Aesir. So if Seder came from the Sami people to the Norse, and Freya brought Seder from the Vanir to the Aesir, is Freya from the Sami people? Are the Vanir gods Sami people gods? So immediately I started to Google this. This is where I started falling down the rabbit hole of who the Sami were, and I'm still learning and all that. But first thing I Googled was the Sami people gods, and no. There are no known gods of the Sami people who line up with any of the known Vanir. So that right there, most anthropologists will be like, nope, the Vanir are not Sami people, let's move on. I think they are throwing in the towel way too early. Let's think about this for a moment. The Sami people have been around for 10,000 years. They have only an oral history. They wrote nothing down. The only thing we know about them is what they can tell us today. Do you really think that in 10,000 years things haven't changed? Stories haven't changed? Of course they have. I mean, just look at things today. Even with social media and things being written down over the internet and that, somebody says something and 2 or 3 reposts later and it's something completely different because people tweak it a little bit. Well, that same thing's going to happen with oral history. We know that happens with oral history. The history of the Bible in the Middle East is very different than what's actually written, because what was written hundreds, if not thousands of years after the oral history started. So it's a pretty certain thing that what we know today of the Sami people and their religion is only a snippet of it, and that the true full story is much larger and mostly forgotten. So is it possible that they had other gods and goddesses 2, 3, 4,000 years ago that could have been very similar to Njord and Freyr and Freya, and that there was some connection, possibly a violent connection, between the Scandinavians and the Sami people? Absolutely there could have been. We know that the Norse were not big fans of the Sami. They traded with them. The Sami were important people to them. They didn't really like them, though. They didn't treat them well. That's a fact. And it's very, very not only possible, but probable that there was some violence. And that could be the basis for the story of the Aesir and the Vanir fighting. Who knows? The bottom line is we'll never know for sure. We just won't. This is purely speculative, and you can't prove me wrong, but I can't prove myself right either. So, it is what it is. It's fun to think about, though. But as you think about it more, the Vanir being very nature-based, the Sami are very nature-based. Seder came from the Sami people. Seder came from the Vanir. Let's assume that I'm right for a moment about Skadi and Uller. Let's assume I'm right. Skadi and Uller are Vanir. Okay? We're just going to assume I'm right there. What is Skadi and Uller known for? Skiing. They're the god and goddess of skiing. The Sami people are always on skis. They live above the Arctic Circle. They are always depicted as being on skis. The very first image we have on any map ever, or any drawing ever, of a Sami, of the Sami people, they're on skis. It's like, 1400, 1500. I figured exactly the age. I'll have all that figured out by the time I do that episode. But even the cave drawings that the Sami people have, they're on skis. So if skis are really important to them, the Norse people didn't really do a whole lot of skiing, except, in the winter. Sami are on skis all year long. You have a god and goddess of skiing, Skadi and Uller. Kind of makes sense that they might have some association with the Sami people. And, this is mostly oral history, both for the Sami and the Norse, up to a point. And we know that the Norse had a hard time pronouncing Sami names. The Norse often gave Sami people Nordic names. To this day, a lot of Sami people have two names. Their Sami name and then their other name, which is more pronounceable and acceptable to whatever country they happen to be living in. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia. So why wouldn't the Norse give new names to the Sami gods and goddesses? It makes sense to me. If they don't want to call an actual person by their name, why wouldn't they change the name of the god or goddess? And just because there's no god or goddess that perfectly lines up, it is entirely possible that Freya, Freyr, and Njord, Skadi, Uller are not necessarily singular gods, or maybe they weren't at one point singular gods, but maybe they're amalgamations of a couple Sami gods. It's possible. From an anthropological perspective, it's possible. So I think that the Vanir are in fact Sami gods. That's where the Sami came from. Or I'm sorry, that's where the Vanir came from, is from the Sami people. We know that elves, dwarves, and Jotuns originally come from Sami mythology, and it was adopted by the Norse. So why not some gods and goddesses too? Makes sense, I think. Now, I know I've rambled a little bit. I didn't really have a script in front of me like I normally do. This was just a thought that I had, and I kind of wanted to put it out there, get my thoughts out there, and see what you think. Do you think that the Vanir come from the Sami people? Or maybe they come from a different Germanic tribe that no longer exists, that we have no record of ever existing, which is what anthropologists believe. I think that's much less likely than them being from the Sami people. And what do you think? Write down in the comments what you think. Keep it respectful. I can't speak. Keep it respectful, because you can't prove it one way or another. This is all speculation. This will only ever be speculation. We can't prove it. They didn't have anything written down. We don't know. But it could be. Certainly could be. So open up that discussion. I will more than happy jump into that discussion in the comments, and if you can convince me otherwise, if you think I'm wrong, go for it. If you want me to, answer some questions, maybe there are some points that I'm missing. If you think of it, let me know, and I'll certainly answer it. And also, let me know if you want me to do that whole video on the Sami people. I'd like to. They're very, very interesting people, and they were very closely connected with the Norse. So I think it falls in line with what the Norse Code is. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. It'll be sometime later in the winter. I still got a lot to learn on it, but yeah. So thank you for listening to me ramble on about this. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Oh, the Sami people are a endangered people. The governments and Christians have spent a lot of effort trying to destroy the Sami people, but there are some organizations trying to keep them afloat. So please, down in the description are some links to organizations that are trying to help preserve not only the Sami people, but other indigenous people around the world. So if you wish to donate and help out, links will be down in the description for that. So thank you again for listening tonight. I hope you have a wonderful day and a happy Thanksgiving for those in the United States, since that is our next holiday coming up. So enjoy, have plenty of turkey, and we'll see you again soon. Good night.